Welcome, everybody. It's episode 60 of the Two Chaps, Many Cultures program. How are you, sir? Today, we are talking multiculturalism, multi-country leadership with Vibhas Ratenjee. Stick around. Can't wait. Yes, welcome back.
Welcome. There you're back, Brett. People were missing you yesterday. People were asking me, where has the dude gone? Well, he's
had a day off. I had a day off. Thank you very much to everybody who sent messages. Everything is good. These things happen, family, and across the globe. Global families, we're a long way away from our families, and when things happen like this, then we take our time off. I encourage everybody to do that. This is why I have a good friend and co-conspirator in Christian, who knocked it out of the park with our good friend Lena yesterday. It was great.
I made do with what I had.
Yeah. Made do. So humble. You're so humble, which is unusual for you, especially when it.
I don't need any of these praises. Oh, stop it. Stop it.
That's right. Well, welcome, everybody. It is Friday. It is episode 60. We are so proud that you've stuck with us for this long. If you've stuck with us for this long, I mean, maybe you haven't, but we seem to be gathering a little bit of steam here. We've got a lot of people that are making comments and adding their questions and that kind of thing, and sending us wonderful messages. And I seem to be running into people who seem to know who we are when I haven't met them before. So that's an indication that we're seeing. Yeah,
that is something that I think is quite fascinating. It happened with our guest that we have today. And before we bring the gentleman on, I want to say a little bit how this came about. So I would say about a year or two ago, I stumbled upon an article that he wrote for, I think, his company blog, and you'll find out about this in a second. And I thought, this is an interesting perspective that I hadn't come across yet, and I like this guy's point of view on this topic. Let me find out who he is. So what I do typically is I go on LinkedIn and I stalk people. And who is that guy? Oh, he works for Gallup. Okay, and he's in a looks like the job description looked like in a fairly advanced position. But well, maybe I'll just send him a connection request and I'll drop a line with it. Say, hey, read this piece. Would love to connect if you see value in it. And he sure did. And at some point, just maybe a week or two ago, he texts me on LinkedIn, mind you, say, hey, I've been watching your program. I think I have something to contribute. And I was like, yes, this is how this is supposed to work.
That's right.
I love it. I love it.
Let's bring him on. I mean, your tension is killing me.
Yes.
Vibhas, welcome, sir.
Hi.
How are you?
Welcome, Vibhas Ratenjee. I still hope I'm pronouncing your name correctly. And I said you work for Gallup. Now, as I told you in the green room, when I say, well, this gentleman works for Gallup, and you know Gallup, all I know is, isn't that the company that does these surveys and market research? What is it you guys do?
That's an interesting question. So every time you think about Gallup, you think about the Gallup poll and the opinion polling we do. You think about the presidential approval ratings we do. So, every president has always looked at the Gallup poll and the Gallup number to see how they're doing. That's less than 3% of our revenues. Most of our work is actually in the area of organizational development, employee engagement, leadership development, succession management. So these kind of more HR strategic areas, besides our customer business, which is all about customer experience. So CX is a big element of what we do. Customer service development, culture development. So a lot of work around culture as well. So we still do a lot of polling. We do it in 150 countries, but it's more on issues like well-being and social issues and so on and so forth. Not so much the rat race of who will win the presidential election. Anybody's guess who that might be this November.
Well, can you do? Oh, can we get you to do a poll on who's the better host on this show? Maybe we should do that.
I think it's probably going to be a 50% split, I'd say. I don't know.
In this
Gallup poll says it's 50-50.
Well, okay, we'll give that up. I'll take that.
Well, I'll call you offline later, Vibhas. We need to manage the polling methodology. We need to have a better result here. So I want to share with everyone who's watching this live or via the replay. So as you check the comment section, you will see a link to the Gallup website, and it is one of the articles that Vibhas wrote many years ago. This is an article from, I believe, 2015. So this is 5 years old, and I think it's still fairly current. Wouldn't you agree, Vibhas? It's about global leadership in a ever-changing global economy. I'm paraphrasing it very loosely.
Yeah.
So this seems to be one of your favorite topics. How do you lead in a multinational, multicultural environment? What are some of the things you learned throughout your career and your personal story that led to this?
Yeah, so there are actually two articles. So one I wrote in 2015 for the Harvard Business Review, which was around a massive study we did in Southeast Asia. That's where I was living, in Singapore. And we interviewed about 70 CEOs, and the idea was to try to understand what made them successful. And so that was that study. And then I've been writing on global leadership, and maybe that's the article I think you read, Christian. But I think what's been very interesting for me to research and understand is what makes leaders successful in Asia. Not necessarily Asian leaders, but when you think about the complexity and the messiness of what Asia is, the range of experience, the range of cultures, what does it take to navigate a culture like that? Whether you're an Asian or whether you're an expat. And so there's been some interesting learning. So one of the biggest learning I think we found is that you can push leaders into cultural sensitivity training and they learn something, but it's no substitute for active on the ground kind of immersion into a culture. And I think if that happens early in the career of a leader, so I'm talking about a key experience. Let me just talk about this a little bit. So when we think about leadership development from Gallup's perspective, we talk about three components. We talk about talent. That's who you are, the kind of your innate talent, what makes you a great leader. And then there's experience, which is the experiences you've had, not how many years of experience, but the specific experiences you've had that has stretched you, that's pushed you out of your comfort zone, that's made you the leader that you are. And then there's development, which is, classroom training and getting a coach or getting a mentor. I have learned that talent is important, but those experiences, that's the way to develop a leader. So when I was pushed into, I'd say about 15, 16 years ago, my company decided that I need to, spend some time in Bangkok, Thailand. I needed to work on a couple of key clients there. I thought that's interesting. It's a great opportunity. I had no idea what level of adjustment I'll have to go through. So when I reflect on it now, it's like that is such a crucial set of experiences I had. It's that navigating that cultural adversity. And you can't do that if you are, what I call a parachute expat. You kind of come in and come out. And you think of that international assignment as a CV filler. Like, hey, I got this. I worked in Bangkok and I worked in Singapore and all of that. It's those lessons that you learned that stay with you and that you apply. So my big area of research has been around key experiences, how experiences drive leadership, growth, and performance.
So when you were sent to Bangkok, were you sent to Bangkok from Delhi or were you sent from somewhere?
From New Delhi.
Okay. So what would you say was your biggest learning in those 4 years in Bangkok?
It was so I'd worked in Bangkok before. I worked around the world, even when I was in India. And it's, like I said, it's a different thing when you're actually living there, actively living there. And it's interesting. So it's difficult when you kind of are put into an environment where the language is completely alien. So when you're sitting in meetings, for instance, where you have a lot to contribute, but there's a language barrier. You just can't communicate. It requires a phenomenal amount of patience. So I'd say what I learned the most, which just stayed with me, are two things: patience and the ability to speak slow. I know it might sound trivial, But I think it's made me, I've got these spidey senses now. Every time I'm more appreciative, I'm more patient with people, and I think I do more to listen. I think an expat assignment helps you create that listening skill more than anything else, because you want to be able to involve people, you want to be engaging people, you want to be listening to people. I think that was great for me for Thailand.
During that time, did you experience other internationals in your organization who were lacking this ability of slowing down and increasing their listening skills?
I think that was pervasive. It's a learning curve, if you may. So I started like that.
Mm-hmm.
Being an Indian, we tend to talk fast, for instance. So you had to really put the brakes on. Like, hey, hang on. Or you've heard of the argumentative Indian, right? So like, let's get into an argument. Let's really get into the meat of the matter. And I think there were quite a few. It just requires the time and the experience and being intentional about practicing listening. Then I think really that is something that most expats need to learn.
Right.
Most expats kind of come in with a mental model of, well, I'll give you an example. So there was part of our research that we published in the Harvard Business Review. I think being cultural experts, you would have heard of the phrase saving face.
Yes.
Yes, it's part of every cultural sensitivity training, saving face. So we talked to 70 of the best CEOs in Asia, and they said it's not about saving face; it's about showing vulnerability. So these leaders were okay to say we are not the hero leader, and the Asian leader sometimes is the hero leader. I know everything, and it's the cult of personality. It's funny in Bahasa Indonesia, the word is kultus, which is nothing but cult. You think about the cult of personality leaders that have emerged from Indonesia, like Suharto and Megawati, strong leaders, I have all the answers. And I think a lot of these leaders are fantastic. 70 of the most high-performing executives are saying, no, I don't have all the answers. That's why I rely on other people. So I learned this, that, some of these leaders have that kind of ingrained, they do better in multicultural settings. And not everybody is, I think, set up for a multicultural. Those who have this innate sense of curiosity.
Yeah. The curiosity is key. I did a whole week global leadership course with a friend, Joyce Osland, and that was a repeated message all the way through. We had speakers that came in. It was just one of I think the three key things was always curiosity, the yearning for understanding the people around them, what made them tick, what motivated them, so that you as a leader could basically use those skills to do what they wanted to do. Be motivated, lead in an effective way. That was the constant message, curiosity. That word kept coming up all the time. Yeah.
You mentioned the HBR article, Vibhas. So for those of you who want to read that, I posted the link in the comment box. So this is the HBR article that Vibhas was referring to. Now, when you said, Vibhas, that vulnerability as a leader is the quality that allowed many of those that you polled to be successful, how did you also measure how easy or difficult it was for leaders from different parts of the world to develop that level of vulnerability? So if I'm sharing a story from my native culture, I'm German. So we, at least in my generation, we are not really taught, or it's not modeled to us to be vulnerable. It is modeled to us to be expert and competent and credible and show expertise. So vulnerability would violate that vein of quote unquote perfection. So it for me, it's a learned behavior, and I'm still practicing it. Have you done any measuring around that as well?
Yeah. So those conversations we had were qualitative conversations. Those were interviews. And during those conversations, the 70 CEOs that I talked about, all of them mentioned that this is important, but very difficult to do, because there's a socio-cultural context of being in Asia. It is expected for you to have that command and control kind of way of leadership. If anything else, you consider a weak leader. So that I think was interesting. But I think the key, something that Beth mentioned about being intentional about curiosity, I think that's important. So a lot of these leaders said they intentionally were curious and they intentionally wanted to kind of understand more. And I think there's a difference between curiosity and kind of superficial curiosity. I'll give you an example. As an executive that I was coaching about 6 or 7 years ago into a new kind of global role, moved into Singapore at that time. And when I talked to him about, curiosity and what he's doing, his answer to that was, you know what, we had this Bollywood night for all our Indian employees, and we had this Indian food that was amazing. Culture is more than food and Bollywood for Indians, or cricket, right? but I think that's the key. If you really want to understand another culture, spend some time with that individual, ask them questions about what are your aspirations? What does great look like for you as an individual?
Mm-hmm.
First, treat that person as an individual, first and foremost. Mm-hmm. And then think about the cultural context. And you can ask questions that get you deeper into understanding the person's background, what high point experiences they had, what they value about family, rather than saying Indian, therefore Bollywood, mm-hmm. or Chinese, therefore red envelopes, or whatever, I think and a lot of these leaders are being very intentionally curious about different cultures.
I think this is the operating word here is intentional, right? So I think Indian food night and Bollywood night can be a start for those who struggle with taking the first step. I think that can be a start if you follow it up with intentional curiosity and say, tell me more about why is it you cook the food this way, or what's the reason behind preparing it this way, or what's the cultural backdrop for that narrative that we're seeing in this particular movie. So then you can add texture to a superficial understanding, right?
I agree. Yeah. I think that's really critical. Understand the person first and understand their culture. And I'm emphasizing understand the person first because at Gallup we have this approach called Strengths Finder, which is essentially what are your strengths, not what are your weaknesses, because we are a positive psychology-based organization. And strengths is the great equalizer in many ways. So if you have a certain strength, culture doesn't dictate that, you dictate that. It's who you are as an individual. Mm-hmm. So what we're really saying here is that when you think about diversity, equity, and inclusion and belonging now, which is so important, I think a lot of that has to value the individual first, because that is everybody's equal, right? And then you can say, well, if you're Hispanic or you're Asian and so on and so forth, that's a second layer of one person's identity. And I think that's so crucial. Your identity is who you are. And then what's laid around it is your cultural identity. Start with the individual.
Now, I want to get into more politically charged territory just because of your personal background that lends itself to asking this question. So you shared with me earlier that you've spent time as a young person, as a diplomat's child in Afghanistan, and that a lot of your work was in Thailand and also in Singapore. And now you live in Southern California. So being a Ratenjee and being a male and being of a certain generation and being from Delhi, was being you, the individual, was being you different in Bangkok, in Singapore, and in LA? And how is it being an Indian male in Southern California compared to these other locations that you spend time in?
Yeah, it's been interesting. So each of these countries I've lived in have had a very different socio-cultural structure. So in Afghanistan, in Kabul, we were pretty much connected with the diplomatic community of mainly Indians. So to a great extent, your thought, your structure, the way you think and the way you behave, the way you believe is guided by that. So it was very much that. It's kind of it's Indians kind of coming together for celebrations, and we have many festivals, so all of that. So to some extent, it was not the world outside as much, and we were still in Afghanistan. There were Soviet tanks, running through the streets. So it wasn't as safe to just go out and meet other people. We still had great local friends, right? So that was my first kind of appreciation of a different religion, I think. and I think about Islam.
Mhm.
That was very important for me to have had that experience.
Right.
Now, India has a very large, Muslim population as well.
Mhm.
But then again, in India, that's different pockets,
Mhm.
So that was great. That was fantastic. Then spent time in India, of course, when I came back. That was great because India is so multicultural. Thailand was the first big shock I got because it's like I can't speak the language. Walk down the streets, the food smells very different. For instance, nothing that I was ever used to. And as I mentioned, that really helped me gain that kind of perspective and patience. Then you move to Singapore, and I spent 10 years there. It's like a virtual utopia. It's like everything's organized and everything's in its place and so on. And you come from such a messy environment like Afghanistan and India and Thailand that it's a cultural shock to start with. It's like, oh, I mean, what have I got myself into? It's nice, but there's so many rules, for instance, right?
This is an interesting point because many of us Westerners who have a superficial understanding of what Singapore is like, some of us may know, well, isn't roughly a third of the Singaporean society of Indian descent and mainly Southern Indian origin? So wouldn't it be easy for somebody from India to fit in Singapore? And yet you're saying the structure and orderliness and the utopia feel made it a little bit strange for you despite that.
Yeah, so I think the Indian community is kind of a microcosm of Singapore society. It's actually less than a third, but and I think Singapore is a more integrated society than any I've lived in. So it was definitely, I felt like there's value in me being Indian. A lot of people I worked with, a lot of clients I worked with in financial services were Indian. So that definitely was it. Unlike Thailand, where it was a very small proportion of expats who used to live in Thailand or in Kabul before that. But I think Singapore is a lot more integrated. And I have Singaporean kids. So last 10 years, my kids were born in Singapore. That's all they know, right? So I think Singapore helped me understand structure and discipline and the value of hard work, because that's what the society is all about. Mm-hmm. So I think it's these lessons that you're learning from different places you've been in. So I consider myself very lucky to have actually lived in so many different cultures. I think my kids had a very soft introduction to US culture because they went through all of this and that exposure to multiple cultures and holidaying in Cambodia or in the Philippines and coming back, absorbing some of that culture. I think when my kids came here, they had a culture shock. You would expect that would be a culture shock, but things are very different in the US, the way things work, and especially California. I think it's prepared them. I think I've prepared my kids more by exposing myself and them to all these experiences to be more global citizens. Mm-hmm. And the millennials in the futures, they consider themselves as global citizens more than anything else. So I think there's a lot of value in those early experiences.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree. As a father of what I would term a third culture kid with, she's 10 and speaks 2 languages fluently and has an Australian dad and a Polish mum. And so we have 3 different accents in this family, 3 very distinct accents. And I'm always biased, and I always give up my bias to my clients. I say, if you've got children and you haven't traveled before, haven't had them involved in your travel before, and you're about to move them to another country, I'm always the positive guy. I'm always saying, this is going to really, you are literally changing your family tree here. You are having a profound effect on the future of your children in the way you expose them in this way, to make them more empathetic, make them more curious, make them more, like you said before, I think you right back to the start where you said, just what I find with my daughter, she's a great listener. She tends to sit quietly first and watch, what style do I have to bring to the table here? Is it my Polish style, or is it my Australian style? Is it my American style? Is it the precocious side of me, or is it so there's this kind of sense of just feeling people out, being curious and understanding first. And I think that, to me, that's something that children will never leave them, and will really serve them well in this global world as they move into leadership, right?
Brett, I'm really hopeful for this global world. Yeah. No matter what's been happening in the past few years, globalization is a force that will never die. Yeah. And I think that's And we are going to get flatter. We are going to get more and more global, no matter what kind of boundaries are put in front of us. But I think somewhere there, when I'm reflecting on my work with leaders, it's sometimes you work with somebody in the US and who doesn't really work in any other country or doesn't manage teams or work with other people. You still need a global mindset because it's an interconnected world.
Yes.
You still need to understand and have that exposure. So global mindset is not only for expats, it's for everyone in this hyper-connected world.
Thank you for saying that, Vibhas. And I mean, you are in a way a third culture kid already, because you already benefited from the travels that your parents took you on. So you're passing it on in the second generation to your children. Now, how has it made you a different leader today? So if you look at the way you work with your peers in your organization or with your clients, how is that different today than it was maybe 15 years ago? Or how is it different compared to other leaders that you've done work with that are less globally minded?
Yeah, I do think that a lot of organizations are investing in more leaders becoming more globally minded. I do feel that we've become, from a thought perspective or a feelings perspective, a lot more global than we were, let's say 15 years ago. Just in terms of people who had the opportunity to travel. I think that's a key one. The first opportunity I had to travel outside of my home country, of course, I was in Afghanistan before, was to China. That just shook my world. And this was right before, I think this was in 2000, perhaps. And it just completely shook my world. It gave me such an understanding of kind of, you think about that frog in the well, you don't know what the world looks like outside. And that one was incredible. Now, one thing I do worry about is opportunities for this kind of global exposure. In this Zoom world that we live in, I think the opportunities are going to be fewer. I think there's a rapid expansion on global exposure over the last, I'd say, 5 to 10 years. Like more people traveling outside, more people being exposed to other cultures. I think with the Zoom culture, and I think this is going to start with travel stopping and fewer executives going in and to other countries, for instance, to see how the business is doing. That is going to be a challenge. So I think leaders, even though they're becoming more globally aware, will need to work harder to be able to connect through a screen, to connect and understand the other person's perspective, their values, their beliefs, their culture through the screen. And it's difficult. So wherever they can, executives, I advise my executives, if you have people who live halfway down the world, in India or in Europe and all of that, you've got to make an extra effort to connect with them one-on-one, to coach them one-on-one, to ask the right questions one-on-one. Right. And the questions are not related to business necessarily. I think it's, what do you value the most? Tell me about a high point experience you had in the last 6 months. These are what are called appreciative questions. Mm-hmm. And it's positive, it's energizing, it's curious. I think leaders need to do a lot more there to be able to do it, rather than saying, well, too bad, I can't make that trip I was planning to Asia. Let's just see what happens. No, still connect more frequently than you were before.
And it what you said validates what I've been saying since the start of this pandemic is, even especially now that travel is restricted and our one-on-one exposure with quote unquote otherness is limited, that makes it even more necessary for us to expand our communicative toolbox in order to be able to relate with the limiting tools we have at our disposal right now. If it's only Zoom or whatever tool we use, that restricts our full body communication, right? So we need a full box, a growing box of tools enabled to efficiently communicate with each other across borders. And I want to applaud you for it. It almost sounded like a throwaway line, but I want to recover that and underscore it. Globalization isn't going away, no matter how much our political leaders want to restrict it or how much we wish it were different. Whether we like globalization or not, it doesn't really matter. There's an article in the same publication, HBR, Harvard Business Review, written by Gianpietro. What's his last name? Gianpietro. I'll find it. I'll post it in the comment box. Gianpietro Petralieri. He made a case for cosmopolitanism instead of globalism. Globalism may be a politically charged concept, and you can have different opinions around it, whether it's good or bad for which corners of the world. However, we've become more cosmopolitan with each other in the sense that we have learned and continue to learn to be with each other, and hopefully in an efficient way that leads to a positive outcome for everyone involved. And it's not a winner takes all kind of concept. It's more of a rising tide that lifts all our boats.
Yeah, and I think globalization is not, it's a strategic advantage for organizations. So if you think about organizations and countries who are doing globalization seriously, who are taking globalization seriously, countries like China, the Silk Belt Initiative, for example, that they have, getting into Africa. And I always talk about Alibaba because that's an organization I really admire. And when you think about their leadership development program and everything they do around that, it's got globalization written into the basic fabric of their curriculum. Mm-hmm. They are preparing their leaders for the future global world. Mm-hmm. And organizations and countries who fall behind, who don't have that kind of perspective, like I said, you don't need to be a global expert to be globally minded. I think they'll lose. So I think it requires you to kind of integrate, because globalization is an experience for a leader. It's not just a construct, it's what you learn from it. It's the experiences you gain from it. It's the lessons you learn from it. The adaptive influence that people talk about, or adaptability or agility. Think of it from a global context, not just think of it from a micro context like you mentioned, Christian. Think of it from a global context. That just changes the game.
In my local community here, we have a lot of diverse communities within it. Mexican, South Asian, Korean, Polish, just in this small kind of city I live outside of Chicago. Now, I tell people that here's an opportunity for even the local business to understand and learn about the global community and to learn about the different maybe cultural influences of the customers they have. Otherwise, they're missing a whole wonderful pool of customers and clients that will do business with them if they don't kind of at least be curious about what is it like to serve a Korean person in a retail setting. I come from a retail background, so I'm always cognizant of wanting to encourage this knowledge about interacting with a Korean might be different than a Polish person, right? Very different. And then if your associates, if the people that are working for you in that in that retail store are not aware of that, don't have some type of training, I think you're kind of missing out on a whole great field of opportunity. So therefore, just in this little retail store in a suburb outside of Chicago, you can live a global life and be curious and take advantage of it.
And Brett, maybe a lot of organizations who have D&I initiatives, maybe they should make them curiosity initiatives or curiosity and respect initiatives. That makes a lot more sense than a program. You need to change behaviors. It's not about a program. And that's where, curiosity, respect, acknowledgement, appreciation of the individual and the culture, that's the key.
Yeah, we had a couple of years ago, we have our local city has their meetings online. They stream them on YouTube. And I was devastated to hear one of our local aldermen, or whatever, I think they representatives, say they were concerned about the amount of, how did they put it, or culturally specific stores, businesses coming into it. So South Asian grocery stores. And they were concerned about this, and they wanted to know, why are we allowing so many of these? And I thought to myself, well, I love my Indian grocery store. I love going there. Now, I don't understand half of the stuff that's on the shelf, but I go there because the lady who's there is always willing to come down the aisle with me and say, have you tried this particular spice? It goes well with, this meat. And I've discovered so much is that I think that, opening up these specific stores are an opportunity, not just for the community that they intend to serve, but also any other people that from another community who walk into an Indian grocery store and go, this smells wonderful. Like, this is great. Maybe I can cook Indian food instead of having to go to an Indian restaurant. So that was kind of like, I thought, wow, what a disappointing statement for somebody who is in a point of leadership. in a community to be concerned about culturally specific stores and businesses opening up. I think it's an important part, and would add to the diversity.
I agree.
Yeah.
Well, I want to lead the two of you down one certain path before we close it out for this week. I know that Vibhas and Brett have a shared interest, a shared athletic interest in which I have no knowledge whatsoever. So who's got the better cricket team, India or Australia? Get into it.
You're opening up a can of worms there, Christian.
Yeah, come on. We haven't got all day here. No, look, I have a great deal of respect for the Indian team. They're one of our global rivals. It's always an exciting competition between the Australian and the Indian team. Yeah,
I think
wonderful.
Brett, Christian, Australia was an early superpower, but the balance of equation seems to be changing a little bit. We're getting there. So it boils down to how many championships you won, and Australia definitely has a supreme edge over India. But we're a young team, where we're kind of building superstars and doing really well, working well as a team. I think not for the first time, but I haven't seen an Indian team so tightly knit as they are right now. And I think they're a global superpower. If you think about the Indian cricketers, it's just like Bollywood. You know, they're some of the most highly paid cultural icons.
Oh yeah,
You know. Yeah. So that's that part of cricket is a big part of Indian culture. I mean,
I just actually saw. I don't usually watch TV, but my family are gone at the moment, so I kind of thought I'll flick the TV on, and I found a documentary about the Mumbai Indians, and it's a great documentary about the back office part of cricket, but it is really a great cultural insight into just what a sport can do for a community and for a culture, and how people, it is a religion. It is another religion. This is a game that is in the hearts and souls of many Indian people. And I don't even think that us Australians have it to that depth, but we have it pretty deep, but not as deep as Indians. So I always appreciate watching the passion in that. And I think the structure of what's happened in these higher profile forms of the game and in India, and it's brought the profile of the players and elevated it even more than it used to be, is a good way. What I found in that team, because they're bringing players from all around India to Mumbai, I found there's a lot of discussion in this back end office about we all come from different regions, we all speak different languages, we all eat different food. Even in the professional sports arena, people are learning, having to be curious, having to be understanding of people's differences. And I think it's a great metaphor for culture. So
just to explain to Christian, a league, we have a league called the IPL in India. So if you think of an average team, to Brett's point, they're from different parts of India, talk different languages, very different culture. And then you throw in an Australian and throw in a Kiwi and throw in a West Indian, because they're international players as well. That's a perfect multicultural team led by a leader who could be an Indian. So you have a Mumbai Indians or a Delhi Capitals who might be led by an Australian. And that's incredible. When you think about a study of multiculturalism, Brett, that's a great study in multiculturalism is an IPL team.
Absolutely, yeah. A lot of the coaches on the Indian Mumbai team are Kiwi and Australian, and they're like, well done, mate. Good on you, mate. Like all this kind of thing. And these young Indian kids are just going, well, I mean, you might want to turn off the Aussiness a little bit. Anyway, thank you so much, Vibhas, your wonderful insights, and it's been an enjoyable chat. We should do this again. This has been a lot of fun. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me on.
Thank you, Vibhas.
Thank you, everybody. Follow us, subscribe. Anything you can do to we're not begging you, but we're telling you. Come and connect with us and reach out to him. I'm sure he's a wonderful, generous person, and we look forward to seeing you again next week. Have a good weekend, everybody. Have fun. See you later.
Happy weekend.